It's the 16th, and I'm in Newcastle, Indiana, talking with Morris and Myrtle Keller. And first question, Grandpa, how old are you right now?
76.
76. Grandma, how about you?
73.
When were you both born?
I was born July the 8th, 1922.
Grandma?
I was born May the 25th, of May too.
Okay, where were you born, Grandpa?
I was born in Seymour, Indiana.
Seymour, Indiana, and Grandma?
Ewing, Indiana, Brownstown, Indiana.
Brownstown, Indiana? Okay, Grandpa, do you remember where your parents and grandparents were born?
My mom was born in Washington County, but just exactly where, I don't know. My dad, as far as I know, my dad came from Floyd County.
No, we're talking Indiana.
Yeah.
Okay. How about your grandparents? Where were they born?
My grandparents, my grandfather was in Washington. Now, I don't know whether he was born in Washington County, but that's where they're from, Washington County, Indiana. And my grandmother, as far as I know, is from Washington County, Indiana.
Okay. How about your parents, Grandma?
Well, my parents was born in Jackson County, down around, below, I guess, in Jackson County down there. Isn't that where that is, down below Brownstown and them?
He's talking about your grandparents.
Oh, my grandparents.
Oh, no, I'm talking about your parents. That's fine. Where
Well, I
was your-
thought you meant my mom and dad.
Yeah, where's your mom and dad born?
Well, down there around Jackson
And
County.
your gra-
But our family originated from Virginia, West Virginia. That's what my
Okay,
sister told me yesterday.
So your grandparents were from West Virginia?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, they originated
Virginia.
from there. Yeah, Virginia. That's
Virginia.
where they originated from. Yeah, but they was born down there, I guess, in Jackson County down there.
Grandpa, do you remember much about your grandparents?
Well, not that much. I've got a book that goes back to the 1700s of where they went from all the way up to 1987, I believe. The last research was 1987, and it was researched then, but they came from down in Virginia, and they were my grandparents, or not my grandma, I'd said happy my great-great-great-grandparents was slave owners, whatever you want to call them.
Mm-hmm.
And the descendants was numerous. I've got a book, but it's so many, it's hard to. And they went from Thomas. They went now, like on my mom's side, they went from Thomas to Creedmoor to different names through the years up until the present time. Some of them lives over here in Indianapolis. The one that researched the book lives over in Indianapolis, and my uncles lived at Henryville, which is Indiana, and he's dead. My mom has passed on. My uncle was 91 when he died. That's her brother. And my mom was 95 when she died. And my dad was, 78 when he died, and he lived at Seymour, Indiana.
Seymour, Indiana.
And before he was married, he was a motor car operator in New Albany, Indiana, which was a trolley car.
That's down by Madison.
That's down by Louisville, just across the river from Louisville. And then from there on, I'm lost. I don't know. I'd have to go to the book to find out about more of them.
Okay. Okay, Grandpa, did you have a lot of interaction with your grandparents?
Yeah, as a boy, I was raised up for a time, as I told you here recently, back in the hills of Washington County, and I liked to go to my grandmas and grandpas. They lived way out in the country and on a farm, And I always liked to go to the milk house, what they call the milk spring house, they call it. They kept the milk back then. You kept it in a big milk can, and in that spring it could be 80, 85 outside. You go in that spring house and get a cup of that milk, and it was like you got it out of a refrigerator, just that cold. And if you was real hot, been out working real hot, you could walk into the spring house and be just like walking into a refrigerated room. And I like to run the hills. Yeah, I did. I enjoyed that. I had a lot of fun. And as a little guy, we had to go down turn off the main road. You would leave Salem and head north. No, you would head east out of Salem and go out there probably 15, 20 miles. And then you took off through the country down over a hill. And when you went down this hill, you had to get up on the other side of the road. You had to drive up the creek, what they call an old slate run creek. You had to drive up that creek to get to the house. And when I was little, we went to school at an old one-room schoolhouse just above our house, where our house was. You had to come, we lived on the hill and come down through the valley, back up the other hill to this schoolhouse. And I don't know whether to tell everything, but I maybe can tell part of it. I was always up to something. I was always into some. And when the school that I went to, there was two set at the desk, and me and my brother sat together, and then there was a desk up ahead of us, and of course a desk back of us. And if we didn't like a girl, we'd just dip her pigtails in an inkwell. And then, needless to say, what her dress would look like, and she didn't even know it. And then there was one guy I didn't like very well. He was kind of stupid like myself, and the teacher would ask a question, and I always had my shoe fixed with a pin in it. And I'd kick him in the butt, and he'd come up out of there with his hand hanging up in the air. And the teacher would acknowledge him and try to get, and he couldn't answer it. Well, we got pointed out, of course, and so we had to stay after school. And back then they had what they call a woodshed, and the teacher would go out there and get a board. Now they whipped you back then. You learned by the reading and writing and arithmetic, like they always said earlier. And he was going to give us a whipping. Well, he went out to the woodshed to get the board, and my brother was smarter than I was. He slipped a book in his pants, and I got a good whipping. I really felt that. And the teacher found out he'd done what he'd done. Well, the next night he got his, because he knowed he had a book in his breeches, and he got whipped. And well, one thing led to another, and then after I got a little age on me, I got a little more stupid, and I brought gun shells to school. And those gun shells back then, they were rifle shells, but they were wood plugs. And we'd pry that plug out of there and get the powder out of it and put it in a piece of paper. And everybody knowed what everybody was going to do, or that we always tried to signal one another. And we had an old long wood stove in the middle of the room, and all those stovepipes went high. I imagine that ceiling was probably 10, 12, 13 foot up from the floor up. And that stove sat down close to the floor, and the pipes went way up there. You had, let's see, one. It was like a home cooked stove, only it was narrow, and it had them lids on there, and we'd always burn our paper. That wasn't unusual. You know, you just fold your paper up and go over there and walk up and open the lid and just throw your paper in there. Well, we'd pried some of them. I said I did. I pried one of them shells. Well, in fact, I pried more than one shell open. We got all that powder, and I just rolled it up in a big ball, and just acting like I always did, going to burn the paper. And so I just put my hand like that, signaled everybody, and I walked over there, and when I signaled like that, I dropped it in there, and everybody fell, and everything blew. stove lead, stove pipes, and everything. Well, I don't remember what happened, but I'm sure it's been a long time, Brian. Lord, that's been umpteen years ago. Because I was probably about 9 or 10, something like that. But anyhow, that was some of the good times we had.
Mhm.
And then when and just before this that I'm telling you about, they'd let the little kids go out early to play, and you always had to take your lunch, and you had a water bucket. You didn't have water fountains or anything. You had a water bucket to drink out of, and everybody had to bring their own cup, or a lot of times we just drink out of the same dipper because nobody thought anything about it. Well, they turned the little kids loose, and then the teacher got to wondering where we was at, and some of the older ones had taken us, and we'd went way down in the woods. Well, they got us back out of that, and then school had let out, and we just like a bunch of wild animals. They'd turn us loose, and we would scatter here and there and yonder. Well, there was a big old chestnut tree way out in the field, and I'm sure you've seen them. Maybe you haven't. But anyhow, they had big old birds like this, and chestnuts inside them birds. And that was our Christmas. We would go and get them old birds and get out all them chestnuts. We had the good life back then. If we stop and think about it, we couldn't buy it because we didn't have the money. There wasn't that kind of money there. But it was there free. All you had to do is get it. And we'd go and get them cones and break them open, and we'd have chestnuts. I mean, we'd have chestnuts, good chestnuts. But where I lived, back up in the hills, where about all you could raise was rocks and kids. And Dad would try to raise a garden, and you'd have to lay up there. It was in a valley, and the woods was over here, and the creek over here, and the other woods over here. And you had to about lay there with a gun to keep the rabbits out of your food. And then me and my brother, of course, I was really the instigator of it. I'd get him in trouble. He wasn't that kind of a boy. He was kind of a mild guy, but I would instigate trouble, and we'd both get into it. And we'd have what we called we had a big old a poplar tree hanging out over this big pond we had, and we'd skinny dip a lot back then. You'd way back in the hills, nobody around, and the traffic wasn't there, so you get out there and run up on that big limb and jump off into that pool. And they had what they called a devil's darning needle. Probably you don't know what it is, but it looked like one of them old flies that flies over the water all the time. Them
Dragonfly.
Dragonfly. Mm-hmm. We called them devil's darning needles. And everybody was under the impression that if that thing hit there and it got you, they'd sew you up about any place they could find a hole. Everybody come out of there just a sailing. And then we had us a poplar log. Now, keep in mind, when you come down the road this way, you had to drive up the creek here and then come back again to get up on the road the other way. Well, at the end of that road, where the road started up, we had us a poplar log weighted down there. And when it rained real hard up in the hills, the water just come up pouring down through there, and you couldn't get up there until the water went down. And our house set way up above the creek, and we'd holler for Mom to bring us a washboard. And Brian, you wouldn't believe the turtles that was lodged to get there, and me and my brother grabbing them just as quick as we could grab them and throw them in that washboard, because there was where your food come from, meat and soup and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. You made it out of turtle meat or rabbit or whatever you could get a hold of. And my dad would never let us bother them turtles. We'd want to, but he wouldn't let us bother them. And he'd kill them, and then we'd pester the head, because that head would be alive mm-hmm. for a long time after you killed that. It'd snap a stick or whatever, you throwed out there to it. And then we'd go back up in them old sand hills, and they had a sand cave back in there. You go back in them caves. In other words, it was a constant boys' exploration. That's all you did. You would explore, You didn't have shoes on. You went barefooted all the time. You in and out of the fields, and you can imagine how tough your feet was through all those bramble fields and all. But we'd go out through there, and then we'd go berry picking. And my mom told me, I was just a little guy, and Mom told me, she said, now you stay out here and you watch for me, and I'm going back here at that wood and get them woods berries. Well, Brian, like I said, I was always full of something, mischief or something. I always was thinking of something to do to get somebody in trouble as well as myself. And Mom said, now you stay out here and watch for me.
Excuse me, Turtle.
Okay, Grandpa, do you remember, it would be your grandparents, it would be my great grandparents.
Yeah.
What were they like?
Well, Grandpa and Grandma, man, I tell you, now I'm talking on my mother's side. They were just great. We had loved to go there. Grandma, back then, you had big comforters and stuff like that, and they were clean as a pin. And we always loved to go to Grandpa's and Grandma's. And now on my dad's side, my grandmother on my dad's side, we was kind of pals, if you want to call it that. I really thought the world and all of my grandmother, and enjoyed being around her. And after a few years, why, I got a little older and I got quite unruly. Dad and I couldn't see eye to eye, and so I went down there for a time and visited with them. And Grandma was always kind person. Both of my grandparents.
This is on your dad's side?
Yeah, on my dad's side. And my grandmother on my mother's side, they were real kind and considerate of the grandchildren. In other words, it wasn't you're going to do what I say, or you're going to do this, you're going to do that. It wasn't that. It was always a joy to be at your grandparents, either side. It was always a joy to be there. But I wanted to continue with what I started prior to this.
Okay.
Mom had told me, and I was just a little guy, we was right at the edge of the woods. And you had a kind of a briar patch way back through there, and they had them great big woods berries, looked like they as big as your thumb. They had big berries. And Mom said, now you stay out here and you watch for me. If you see a snake, you holler for me. So I waited. I seen a dried end tarpon going back through there, and you probably know what they are. Looks like a little turtle, but and they call them terrapins.
Oh, yeah.
They're harmless. We used to pick them up and carry them in our pockets and carry them around with us. But anyhow, Mom had started back through there, and she'd got in a big part of the briar patch. And I hollered, snake, snake. And boy, Mom come out of there. I mean, the briar patches was a-frying. She said, where's it at? And I pointed to it, the dried end tarpon. Brian, I got it. I got it. Mom give me a good lemon. But Mom was just Mom. Mom was a kind of a pal, and she was somebody that understood you when nobody else did. And she was, when you was in trouble, she'd console you. And I remember when I was in a tornado, and I was about probably 11 years old. There come a big tornado down there, and Dad was in the new barn, and I was in the old barn across the road.
How old were you then?
I was about 11 years old, 10 or 11, and I was in the old barn, and I was watching this storm, and it was taking birds and slamming them up against the barn, killing them. And I thought, I'm going to wait my chance, and I'm going to head out of here and head for the house. Well, it just lit up just a little, and I took off. And I got to the house all right. And then, as soon as the storm quieted down, the lady across the road said, the new barn's blowed over, and John's under it. That was my dad. Said, John is under the barn. And when it blowed over, it killed I think 40 head of hogs. And Dad was fortunate enough that when it blowed over, it was coming from the north and it blowed south, and Dad and him the hard hand was supposed to run north, and Dad started running south, and when he fell beside of a big beam. That kept him from killing him because it broke his back, but other than that, it kept it from killing him.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a long time for him to get, because of so many trees, blowed over and took the chicken house, carried it over and put it on the railroad tracks, which is probably as far from here to my barns out there. Carried that chicken house that far. And you're still going to be on this, so I'll go ahead with the rest of it. And now we was working for this man. He was a farmer, but he was crippled. He couldn't work, and we done his farm work for him. And she had a big watermelon patch, they raised a lot of watermelons and a lot of mushmelons, cantaloupes in other words, down there in Jackson County, and they were good cantaloupes. So me and my brother got back there, and I got me a cantaloupe and took off. The cornfield right next to it. And he was unfortunate. He didn't get to take off. He got caught. And I heard him promise her he'd do this and he'd do that. He'd do work for her for nothing that she wouldn't tell Dad. Okay. So she agreed not to tell Dad, and I thought, well, I'll take care of that one. So she had a big watermelon that she always had for State Fair. Brian, it was a humongous big watermelon. So I waited till about dark, and I slipped back in there. Me and some other guys slipped back in there and got that big watermelon, and we took it over in the old Lutheran graveyard, busted it open, and boy, you talk about good watermelon. We had it. Next day, it sounded like somebody on a warpath. She was a hollering and a yelling. Somebody had got her big watermelon. And of course, nobody wasn't going to tell it. Not me, especially not me, because we'd enjoyed that watermelon too well. But I paid her back for making my brother work for nothing by eating that big watermelon, that big State Fair watermelon.
So she never found out?
No, never did. Not that I know of, Brian. I don't know. Of course, the poor old lady's dead now, her and her husband both. But as far as I know, they never did know who stole that watermelon.
Well, we don't.
Now that's bad about telling things on yourself. But and then where they built the big airfield during the war down there, Seymour, just out on 50. It used to be the old casting school, and I went to school there. My brother and sisters all went to school there. Well, we would always be up to something. I'd be coming up the road and I'd see a snake over there on the limb, and I'd reach up and get that snake and wrap him around my neck and button my shirt up and walk in the schoolroom and turn him loose. It'd either be a snake or a mouse or whatever you might be picking up. Most generally it was a snake. And you'd turn it loose in the teacher's desk, and then, man, you talk about things that happen, and it really happened, and it happened to me sometimes. But anyhow, there was a guy there. Well, all of us guys was always up to something. And this guy had jumped out the window of the school and headed out across the cornfield. Well, the teacher made a mistake about telling us boys to go after him. So we agreed we was going to go after him. We was going to bring him back. And as soon as we got outside of where the teacher couldn't see us, we kept motioning him on like that.
Oh, yeah.
So, and we was probably 3 miles or 4 miles into Seymour. We'd motion him there, and then we'd get into Seymour while we'd go play pool or something like that, and finally come back to school like we'd been out that long hunting him up.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they never did know any different than that, because we wouldn't tell it, or neither would he tell it. And then there was so many things, Brian, that it's hard to think of everything that was happening, but we...
Sounds like you were keeping busy.
Huh?
Sounds like you kept busy.
Well, we kept busy, and I remember one time in particular, maybe I had no tell that. I was thinking of the Pontiac car and the Pontiac Indian, and I got caught at it.
Well, you were older then, weren't you?
Oh yeah.
Okay, well, don't tell that yet, because
No.
we're not there. Let's see what.
No.
Grandma's looking like she's itching to say something, so let's see what she has to say.
I just listen.
What can you tell me about your grandparents, like on your mom's side?
Well, now my grandma, her mother, I remember her come down and visit us, but her husband now on her daddy, I can't remember too much about him. Oh, I know that what I've heard that he was blind,
Mm-hmm.
But Grandma Charles, I can remember her, she'd come down, and visit some mommy's people. But Mom and Daddy, they always was, good parents, hard-working parents. Mommy worked hard, very protective mother, good mother, very clean, immaculate, and raised us, very protecting, like I said. But my grandpa that was blind, I can't remember too much about him, because I guess I was just little. And on my dad's side, see, I can't remember too much of his. Well, I guess I was a baby when they died, not too old. All I know is what was told to me.
Mm-hmm.
But now Grandma Wagner, Hattie Bell was her name. Her name was Hattie Bell. And her daddy's name was, this is on Daddy's side. Now on Daddy's side, his mom was named Mary Jane, and I don't remember her because I was just little, just born. And Elisha Wagner, that was his dad's name.
So
Elisha.
that would be my great-great-grandparents on your dad's
On my
side.
dad's side. Mary Jane was her name, and Elisha Wagner was his name. Of course, I don't remember much about them. Well, I can't because I was just a baby,
Mm-hmm.
And
So you were the youngest of all the kids in your family?
oh
or?
no, I was next to. They had 7 girls. Mommy and Daddy had 7 girls. There was Catherine. Well, there's one that passed away, Mildred Leody. She was born, I guess, just stillborn. There was Catherine, Gladys, Pauline, and me, and Betty Lou, and Elizabeth Ann. There was 7 girls of us all together. They never had no boys, but I never heard my daddy ever complain, Brian, about not having no boy. And getting back now to my dad, he was a very hard worker, loving dad, protective. He worked at the brickyard, and he'd walk to work, and he'd walk back. And in the summertime, we'd take his lunch to him, in a dinner pail, take his lunch to him. Usually me and Betty Lou most of the time.
At this time, you were living where?
Well, in Brownstown and in
Okay.
Ewing. We had moved there. And so they were awful good parents, loving parents, protective. And Mommy, she'd work out for people. And what Gladys told me, when they was Catherine and him, Gladys and Catherine, as they growed up, Daddy would even take people, work in people's, they plant big tomatoes, big fields of tomatoes and green beans, and he'd work out for people. But what I can remember, he worked at the brickyard. And
What did he do there?
they made bricks. Oh, they made bricks. They had them there coal things. It'd be, just rounded things. And Daddy worked back there, and the bricks was made out of clay, And Daddy's job, they would load that there big thing, a great big long thing. And Daddy would have to push that back there where they would bake. They would bake, and then he'd have to go back there and get them. He had a hard job. Daddy worked hard in the brickyard. And Mommy worked hard too. She worked out for people. My mother back then, housework, they worked out. They didn't make very much money. And, maybe 50 cents a day. They'd go work for them. And iron and house clean and everything. And then after Daddy passed away, when I was 15 years old, and Mommy, she worked at the canning factory. Yes, Mother worked at the canning factory a lot, different times, and then she got a job at Arvin's. That's a war plant. She got a job there and worked there.
Do you remember ever hearing any stories about how your mom and dad met when they were younger? Or?
Well, they married when Mommy was 17. Of course, they lived down there in Jennings County, down there where I told you, And They met when Mommy was 17 years old, and my dad was 35 years old. But they were happy. They was married, I think, was 20 years. They were happy and loved each other and devoted to their kids, raised their family. And best I can remember, even my daddy, even when I was a little girl, Daddy was awfully big-hearted. And on Mommy's side, a lot of times, a lot of them would come down there, and they'd board at Mommy's, stay at my mother's house, and work at the canning factory. A lot of my relation up here, they'd come down there, and during the canning factory season, where they worked down there in the canning factory, they'd stay at Mommy and Daddy's house. Now they stayed there. Mommy would can, my mother would can. Oh, Daddy would put out big gardens. Every summer, my dad, now these is good memories that I can remember, my dad always put out a big garden. And Mommy would can. And of course us girls, as we got bigger, we'd have to wash the cans, and Mommy would can a lot. But we always had our 3 meals a day, Brian. My mother cooked breakfast, she'd cook dinner, and cook supper. And even through the Depression years, what I hear when people had it hard and lean, my mother, she'd make meals out of meals. Gladys told me cornbread would be even left over. My mother would even put sage and onions and fry cornbread. I never know what it was to go hungry when my dad was living. And even during the lean years, because Gladys would tell me things that I know heard, that they'd even do everything to make it, Of course, he worked at the brickyard, like I told you. And he put out big garden, worked hard. They were very protective, hard-working parents, and was good-hearted to everybody.
Do you remember any, with Sarah being 3 years old, we read to her all the time and sing lullabies and stuff. Do you remember any times when your mom or dad would read to you or sing lullabies to you or anything? Do you remember anything like that?
Well, I'm sure Mommy did, because she'd had, us kids was kind of close together, but I'm sure Mommy, I remember, I can't remember vaguely everything like that. All I can remember is she being such a good mother, and clean and working hard, and protective, and my daddy the same way. Because if I'd go take my daddy's lunch to him, of course it'd be a good mile, I'd get to play with some of my friends, but I'd have to be back home, And when evening come, your kids was home back then, and we had coal oil lamps, Brian. We lived in houses then that we'd have to, and Daddy was so protective. Us kids, even carrying a coal oil lamp, we didn't even get to do that till we was older, and of course when I was 14, we moved from that place, and went down where we had light bulbs, Of course we had a light bulb one other time. But I was 14 years old when we got a radio. But back then, it was different then. Even your friends, you know what I mean. There wasn't the mean times back then like there is now. You wouldn't have to be as careful. And you minded your parents back then. And I can remember that. And of course when I got...
Sounds like Grandpa didn't mind his parents all that well back then, but maybe you minded your parents.
Well, I never got very many whippings from my daddy, but when I did, I'd need them. I was mischievous. I was the mischievous one. But if I did anything, I'd just hastily more with my mouth, I remember one time my sister Catherine come up, her and Jim, and I was aggravated. We had company. Gladys and Jones had come down there to visit, and that night, and was staying overnight with us. And I was kind of peeved because I wanted to go show. I was just about 14 years old, and I wanted to go show, and Daddy wouldn't let me. So I was sitting out there, of course, on the porch step, a pouting, and just kind of peeved, because I didn't get to go show. But Catherine and Jim come up. And Catherine said, "Hi, Myrtle." So I never spoke back. I just kept my mouth shut. She went in there and told on me.
Well,
yeah, but back then you didn't get to do everything you asked for. The parents, they knew best, and they was very protective. But I do remember doing mischievous things, Yeah, I did very mischievous things. And even with my sister, seemed like I was the one that was spirited and mischievous. But I'd hardly ever got whippings from my dad, but when I did, I needed, and not too many there. But it was Mommy, was all the time. they kept a switch, and sometimes you had to go cut your own switch.
I've had to do that
So
myself.
you know I did some mischievous things.
Yeah, I've had to do that myself. Well, Grandpa, do you remember any stories about how your mom and dad met, or?
No, Brian, I don't really know. I can't recall any because after we got a little older, you was having such a hard time making ends meet that you just had to. It was a constant woman and man constantly working. Dad would be working till way up in the dark, and Mom be working, and
That's what it was.
just trying to make ends meet.
So,
And I remember we lived out south of, or west of Seymour, out on the old 50, they called it, old Highway 50. We lived out there, and you didn't have refrigerators, and you didn't have electric lights a lot of the time. Once in a while, well, now finally we got out there, we did have electric lights, but how we kept our food cold in the wintertime was a window box. And put your food in that window box to keep it cold.
okay.
Because you did. And if you had ice, you had an ice box, what's called an ice box. You put a 50-pound chunk of ice in there, and that kept your food cold. But when we're talking this, when you had a bunch of kids, you never had much leftovers.
Yeah.
In other words, food was got rid of. I remember at times that Mom would fix a pumpkin, one of those great big pumpkins, Brian. It would be in a great big, it's unbelievable now, but it was in great big round kettles. She'd cook a big pumpkin, and we wouldn't even let her make a pie out of it, because, Brian, that was our goodies to eat after we had ate our regular food. And of course, we'd have fried potatoes and gravy and stuff like this, but as far as meat, you didn't have it that much, but when you got it, it was a treat. I remember we'd always look for Sunday. On Sunday, we'd have maybe beef and noodles or something like that, and that was a real treat for you. Unless some of them would come up from Louisville, and they would bring wieners and stuff like that, and us kids, we didn't hardly know what a wiener was like. And they'd bring them up there, and that was a feast for us kids.
Yeah.
But you was asking your grandma about, could you remember the times that they'd read to you? And I used to sit by my mom's feet, just like a little kid would, and I'd get Mom to read to me, because I could, of course then I wasn't able to read, but she would sit and read to me till she would get hoarse and have to quit.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd always go back to her the next day, get her to read to me again, and then from then on, after I got older where I could read, then I'd buy what they used to call it Wild West Weekly. It was a magazine. And I would buy that, and Mom would want to read that after I read it. In other words, me and her was exchanging reading material.
It's
Let
kind
me
of
tell you something about Mommy.
All right.
My mother couldn't read good. She didn't go through very much of school at all. Maybe it would even be possible probably to third grade, and maybe not that. But my mother couldn't do that. But after she got saved, Brian, and served the Lord, I had to bring this in. Did you know the Lord let her get on at a war factory? He gave her the knowledge and wisdom, began to let her read her Bible a little bit, didn't he? But see, my mother couldn't do that. I remember, but my mother, she was one of the caring, loving, hard-working mother,
Yes,
just
she was.
protective, even though I know she's bound to sing to me a lot, but as far as reading, back then their life was full more of work and taking care of their children, and you went to bed early at night time. Your parents got you in the bed early, because they had to get up early and work together. But on my side, I was really happy, and protected. I had a happy childhood, and we knowed other people, of course they worked hard too, but especially about my mother, I can remember. But after she got in church and served the Lord, the Lord let her begin to read some. She got her a factory job, paid her home off, Brian, paid her home off. But like I said, I can't remember too much about my great-grandparents, but I do know that even on Mommy's side, her dad's name was Franklin Charles, and her name was Hattie Bell on on my mother's side. But I did want to bring that in about Mommy,
Well, yeah.
what the Lord done for her in her life.
Well, that's interesting because I just
Yeah.
realized, did you know Grandma's mom pretty well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Made the
how
best
would-
pies, tell
Oh,
her.
How would you how would you characterize
Oh.
Grandma's mom?
Oh man, I'll tell you what. I was high tempered, Brian, and if she thought she had hurt me in any way, she would make what they call a mayonnaise cake or something. I think that's the way it was.
She called it Nanny.
Mayonnaise cake. If and she would apologize. She would really apologize to me, and a lot of times it was my own fault. You know what I mean? I was just well, young and full of vinegar, and I didn't care what I said because I wasn't living no Christian life back then, and I didn't care much what I said. But she had a good mother. She had
Yes.
you had to respect her for what she believed in, and if she thought she hurt you, she was ready to apologize. But if you needed it, you got it.
Oh, yeah.
She had to be strong.
She was the
independent.
kind of a person that she just told you like it was, like it is. And then when me and her met, why she was working at Arvin's and I was. I think I'd been in Arvin Industries about 2 years, and her mom come in there, and of course I kind of liked Myrtle anyhow, and her mom called me Keller.
Keller.
Yeah, that's what she called me.
Come down to eat beans.
Yeah, and I'd go down there at Myrtle's to visit her, and Pauline had fixed beans, fried potatoes, man, Brian, cornbread, and oh man, that was the best grub. A restaurant couldn't beat it. And but as far as I never knowed her dad.
No, Daddy died when I was 15 years
Her
old.
daddy died before ever I even knowed her. But of course, I was around her anyhow, and when I met Myrtle, why that kind of put the icing on the cake. I wasn't wanting nobody else to, mess around with, but I was hitting about everyone in Seymour as far as that concerned, as everyone that would have anything to do with me. I'll put it that way. But when I met Myrtle, and a lot of time, and I was working at Arvin's, and of course she wasn't at that time. When I was courting her, I'd go down there at her house, and I'd leave her house before midnight. But I would go up at Brownstown and sit along the street there, and there was still activity after midnight up there, and sometimes I wouldn't get in Seymour till in time to go to work. And then I'd go to work, and then next night I wouldn't go down there, I'd go right to bed. But that's the way she and I courted, and then she got in at Arvin's, and that's where I think I proposed to her there in the
Yeah, I was sitting on
factory.
some pipes. We went together about 2 months, and I was sitting on a stack of pipe. At lunchtime, you know how it is, they give you time, maybe 15 minutes, and you can get your Coke and things. And so, we was married in the house that I was born in. Brother Gator married us in the same house I was born in. We finally moved back to that house, and that's where we was married at.
So you had
Got
a
romantic.
romantic proposal while
Yeah,
Grandma was sitting on a
stack
stack
of
of pipes
Right.
inside of an industrial complex.
That's right. That was during war times, and
Yeah.
then yeah,
So that was 1943
that
or
was 43.
43.
1943?
We was married in
Year.
1943. Let's see.
Yeah, 43, the 2nd
And I
of
can't-
July.
Yeah, July the 2nd, 1943.
Married a year when Lena
So
was born.
so all three of you, your mom and you and Grandpa, all three were working at Arvin's, and you
Yeah.
what were you building there for the war?
Well,
Just out
it
of
was
curiosity.
mufflers and tailpipes for
Yeah,
trucks.
bullets.
When during the wartime, you make the mufflers and tailpipes, and they still do that yet today. But of course, they're made for cars and
Right.
vans and stuff like that now. But then it was for war material.
Yeah, well,
You
So
said
what it was then, Brian, and on top of that, they made well, they had a pipe, not quite as big around as my arm, just a little bit smaller than my arm, and that pipe was this long. Well, what it did, it went down inside the bomb, and it carried the charge, the powder, and all. It went down inside of that bomb to set that bomb off, and that's what we made. Is I guess you might call it a fuse, whatever. But it was a pipe filled with powder and a charge to set that bomb off.
Yeah.
And then we made, of course, we made parts for the trucks, whatever part they had to have on a truck, like, you know, mufflers, tailpipes and all that, they made that too. And then when I come up here, why, I went to work in Chrysler, and they were making what they called a duck bill. Well, that was for a tank. That was a track for a tank. We was making duck bills, and we was making, they had the gun department, they was making tracer shells in the gun department. Well, in fact, Chrysler, they made a lot of various things for during the war times, you know.
This is 1944, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I hired in there in June the 26th, 1944. And I come in there, Brian, and listen to this. This might be interesting to some of them later on. When I come up here, I had $3 in my left to live on for a week. And Jonesy come down there, Myrtle's sister's husband, come down there, said, I got you a job at Chrysler if you want it. I said, okay, let's go. So I come up here on Sunday. On Monday morning, I was over to Chrysler at the, now they had the gate open there where that trailer is on 18th Street. They had you went in that way to hire in. And I went in there, and they didn't, as far as examination, they never had much of an examination, not even hardly a written examination. And I went that morning and went back and went to, he said, well, when can you come to work? I said, today afternoon if you want me to. He said, all right, come right down in. So I worked there from 1946 or 1944, and I retired in 1988. I had 43 years and 8 months in Chrysler, and a lot of guys, Brian, I'd like to say this. A lot of guys said I wouldn't have worked there. I wouldn't work in a factory like that. I don't think I'd like to work in a factory. But I like to tell them this. Well, when I look at my retirement check, I'm glad I worked in a factory like that. Yeah. Because if I was thinking, when I was down in the southern part of the state, and I come up here, Brian, my check for 6 days was $18.75. The first check I drawed over here was $40. And you can imagine how I felt.
Oh, yeah.
I felt like I was living on Easy Street. Well, it wasn't, Brian, because I had a family then. Linda was just
6 weeks old.
6 weeks old when I come up here.
Yeah.
And then along come Donna,
Yeah.
and then Tommy, and then Janice.
Yeah.
But
well, did when you moved, did you know Grandpa's parents pretty well, Grandma?
Oh, yes, I had the best mother-in-law and father-in-law. We never had that one cross word from the time I married in that family. Oh, yes, they were wonderful.
How would you characterize Grandpa's mom and dad?
The best.
Just the best, huh?
The best. Wonderful, wonderful people. I was blessed. It wasn't this lucky. I just think I was so blessed to get in that family. Oh,
so
when
you guys moved to Newcastle from Seymour, what did your family say?
Well, they was glad. They was really glad because back then, see, Mommy was still working. And of course, we had a tragedy, you know, in Morse's side of the family because when Linda was just born, just about a couple of weeks or 3 weeks, they got news of Donald's going down in the submarine, you know. We got news of that. I never got to meet Donald, and that was awful. His brother that was in the Navy. And so then when Linda was 6 weeks old, when we come up here, now it was a few years before Mom and Dad. We'd go down there a lot, you know, and visit them. We'd take the bus, me and Morse with Linda, because we was homesick. But it was a few years before they could come and stay all night with us, because us getting a house, you know, to have bedroom for them. But oh, they was the best. We never had that first word, never had that first quarrel, did we, Morris? And Dad Keller and Mom Keller was wonderful. And they wanted my mother to be with them a lot too. They'd invite her over there to eat. So really, we was close. We was very close.
So did you guys continue to get together for holidays after you?
Well, we
Newcastle,
didn't get
or-
to go much down there for holidays when our kids was little. We'd usually go in the summertime, in the winter. But they'd come up here and stay weeks at a time with us, wouldn't they, Morris?
Yeah.
Lorene and his sister would bring them up here, and they'd stay with us a week, and we'd take them back. But as far as close, of course, we had our family by then. See, our kids was getting bigger by then, see. Linda and Donna Sue and the others, and we'd have our Christmas at home.
Tell them about how they like to go to Mom's.
Oh, yeah, they loved to go down to
Linda
Mom
and
Keller.
Donna Sue.
Yeah, they loved to go down there. They was close to them and close to my mother. And Mom Keller always sent them a box. She'd always send them a package, for Christmas. And of course, they couldn't hardly wait to open that. And back then, you couldn't get big Christmas for your kids. If you got coloring crayons and a coloring book and maybe pajamas and things like that. But now I remember when Tommy got bigger, we got him a wagon, didn't we, Morrison? A red
Yeah.
wagon, and of course they all loved that. And then we got him a bicycle when he was about 13. But back then, the material things in life, you got as you could, but they understood, and you was happy. I don't know, it just was
This
different
is-
time.
This is 1944. We're still at 40. No, we're probably
No,
talking about 50.
it's later in years then, when the kids got
You're
older.
55.
You're looking at about the 50s.
Because Linda was 5 years old when Morrissey got saved in church. And then to other kids, like I said, Linda was born first. And Donna Sue was born in February, 46. And Linda was just about 3 months of being 2 years old.
Well, before we talk about your kids, can we talk a little bit about
Yeah.
your brothers and sisters? Because I didn't know like Grandpa's brother Donald.
Yeah, oh yes.
I didn't know that
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, let's go back to him. Let Dad tell you more about that.
First of all, how many brothers and sisters did you have?
Well, I had a twin brother, and then, he was 3 boys, and he was 1. Eve and Edith is twins, Lorene and Vera, that's 4. They was 7 kids. But my twin, which was a boy, Marvin, he was about, probably, I don't think he was 6 months old when he died, because what he had, Brian, they didn't have a cure for it then. They called it rickets, but they didn't have a cure like they got today. And Mom told me later on that even if he would have lived, he'd have been a vegetable. And I left one out, Doris. Doris was the oldest, and I was next, and then Marvin, and then Donald,
Anita,
and then Eve and Edith,
and
and Lorene, and then Vera. Vera was the youngest.
no, Lorene was the youngest. Vera.
Yeah, that's right. Vera was next, and then Lorene.
Yeah.
Lorene was the youngest. They was Doris, myself, Marvin,
Donald.
and Donald was next. Eve and Edith, and Vera, and then Lorene.
Yeah.
And my brother was a lot different from me, Brian. In other words, and I characterize it a lot of times as different between daylight and dark, because for the simple reason is that I was strong-willed, and I wanted to do my thing my way, and I didn't want nobody to tell me how I was going to do it, which wasn't right. And I'm not defending myself. I want to understand that, because I had a good dad. My dad worked hard, but Dad and I, until I came to the Lord, Brian, Dad and I never had a real close relationship from the standpoint of back then, dads couldn't take out time for kids. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
You couldn't play ball. You couldn't do this. You couldn't do that. All your life was made up was work. And consequently, when the boys got big enough, that was their duty too. They had to get out and help work. And when we was about, my brother and I, probably,
Are you talking about Donald?
yeah,
Okay.
we would go to the barn. We'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, go to the barn and milk. That was our duty before we could even eat breakfast or anything like that. And we each one had a cow. That was our cow to milk. And Dad would milk 2 to our 1. But Dad was good. I'm not trying to reflect anything on Dad, because Dad was good to us boys. But I think sometimes there's in a family, one boy is a little more, what is it? A little pushy than the other one. And the other one is just a little bit more milder. And I was the person that was a little bit pushy. And when I done it, Brian, it would get me in a lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Because I didn't have an ear to listen. I wanted to be the big cheese and do it on my own way. But a lot of times I get myself in trouble. And my dad and my mom was always good to me, though. I can't deny that. They was great to me. And after I come up here and I gave my heart to the Lord, Dad, things between me and Dad, it was just like everything opened up. You know what I'm saying? Everything opened up, and we was wanting to be around one another as much as we possibly could. We would talk where we couldn't before. Now, all of this, and like I say, when I came to the Lord, it changed me and my thinking than what it was before. Because Brian, I was wild. I was a wild person. I was a drunkard from the time before I married Myrtle. But I'd get on drunks that'd be unbelievable. And of course, my dad, my mom, couldn't help that. That wasn't their fault. Well, consequently, I moved out and I moved into Seymour. They lived out in the country, and I moved into Seymour and got on my own. And then I knowed I could do just anything I wanted to, and I did.
Went through a all stage.
That's right. I went through what they call sowing your wild oats, and I'd be drunker and everything, and I was just fortunate that I never did get caught and put in jail. But it wasn't my dad or my mom's fault. It was Mom.
Too much in that.
You can tell anything you want to tell or anything you don't want to tell.
But like I say, Dad would come up here, and he thought so much of Myrtle that if he thought he could pick her a mess of beans, I'd make a big garden always. And Brian, I had my garden almost up here to my house, and it went all the way back. But
it was wonderful.
It just had to gradually move it back. But Dad would want to go out there, and if he could pick her beans, that'd just tickle him to death. And he was the one that cut the doorway in our bathroom, cut it through there. Of course, he was a carpenter. He always wanted me to be a carpenter, and I couldn't. I just didn't like it. I didn't want nothing to do with it. And school, I couldn't get interested in school, so I only got a 5th grade education. It wasn't Dad's fault. It was my fault, because I was just done things that, you know, a boy that wouldn't listen. And a lot of time my dad would tell me, he said, well, you'll be sorry for it. And like he said, there was a lot of things that I was sorry that I done, but I paid the price for it.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, Brian, I had a good mom and dad.
The best.
I think I had the best of Mom and Dad, because Mom was real understanding, but I look at Dad from the standpoint of how I was when I went to work. Dad probably wanted to take time, but didn't have the time because of his work. Well, when I was raising mine, I never had the time that I have had with my grandchildren, you and Johnny and all of you guys. I never had that time with my boys, my girls, that I was able to devote when you guys was little, because I I was working at Chrysler, and then when I got laid off, I went to work for Dickerson, and I was working all the time up there, all the time I could put in. Went back to work at Chrysler, and I'd get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, be out there and work till just come in time to take my shoes off and put my work shoes on and go to the shop. I was just gone just like that all the time. Could be with my kids, and now I can look back, reflect back. My dad was in the same situation because he had to work. I seen him sit down to read a paper, and directly the paper dropped down, he'd be asleep. It just, it was just them times. It was something you couldn't help, but you had to do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, what happened to Donald in World War II?
Well, Donald went. He was signed up for the Navy, and he put his boot camp in at Great Lakes in Illinois. That was a naval base in Illinois. Well, he wanted to go into submarine service, and with the understanding that he'd get a better rating. Now, he was a first-class radio man on an aircraft carrier. That's what he was. That was his rating then. But he wanted to go into submarine duty. But in order to go into submarine duty, Dad had to sign the papers that he could go in because he wasn't old enough. Well, Dad signed for him to go because Donald was putting the pressure on them both. I'm sure. I don't know the full particulars of it because at that time I was gone. I'd moved out. Mm-hmm. Me and her was married, and so I'm satisfied that that's what happened. And Dad signed up for him, and Dad and I was working at Seymour Manufacturing plant there in Seymour. They made shovel blades, digger blades, and all of this, and foxhole shovels and stuff like this. And Dad was a boiler fireman, and I was a night watchman. And Dad come in. I'd just come to work because we was working we was working nights, and Dad come in and we was working afternoons, and Dad was on afternoons. Dad come in and he just handed me a letter, never said a word, just handed me a letter, and I read it, and it was that my brother had been lost on this sub, and it affected him real bad. It really did. But they claim that they was on a convoy from Pearl Harbor to the Italian shore. And what I understand, I could be wrong on this, I understand it was an 800 or 180 man sub, 180 men on that sub. And of course, as far as they know, they've never even found the sub. They don't even, that was the last contact. In fact, I remember seeing him once after. I don't think I've ever seen him once after he got into the service. Maybe I seen him once, and that was the only time I seen him before he was, declared missing. And then, of course, it takes a while. Sometimes it takes 2 years for him to completely declare him, gone.
Mm-hmm. Well, how many siblings did you have, Grandma?
7 altogether. They had 7.
And you named them earlier.
Yeah, I did. I named them earlier. Catherine was the oldest. Well, now little Miller, the oldie, the one that passed away.
Each family had 7.
Mm-hmm. So Catherine, Gladys, Pauline, me, and Betty Lou, and Elizabeth Ann. Of course, little Elizabeth Ann's deceased too,
Yeah, no,
she's the one that.
She's the one that got into the.
Well, we don't know how it happened. We'll never know, Brian, how that happened, because we didn't even know if we had any strychnine, because Daddy was taking it for his stomach, but it was
for his heart.
So we'll never know. That's something we'll never know. Betty Lou was just 5, and it was 2, and we had to live in one little room. It was during the ending of the Depression.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, Brian, I got to tell you
something we'll never know.
And this is, it's always left a real impression on me, because I was, after me and Grandma married, Grandma got in church.
21.
And I didn't. It was 25. I was 25 before I come in church. But I was wild. I was drinking. I'd drink so much that I'd have to crawl because I couldn't walk. I'm not telling this to tell to go on with what I'm going to say, because I told your grandma, I said, Myrtle, come go to town with me, and that's when stores was open on Saturday night.
Except her.
Let's take a break for a second.
Yeah.
Okay, Grandpa, you were telling us a story about Mom.
Well, like I told you, that I was real wild. But anyhow, this one particular time, I said, Myrtle, come go to town with me. And like I told you, the stores was open. And she said, no, you come go to church with me. And I said, well, I'll walk over there with you. And Linda was my only child. Well, I had Donna, but Linda was my
Close buddies.
boy, buddy. She was my buddy then.
Yeah.
She
right.
was, if where Dad went, she went.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyhow, I said, okay, I'll walk over there with you, and then I'll come back, and because I got me some funny books I want to read, and I'll buy me a cake. And Linda said, I'm going too, Daddy. And so she would go with me. And so we went down to the store, and I bought the cake, and I got back to the house. And this is always, I'll never forget this, Brian, as long as God gives me breath. She come up to me, she said, Daddy, let's go back to meeting.
Now she was 5 years old. Your children's your treasures. We was happy, right? With our children, we loved
She said, Daddy, let's go back to meeting. I said, okay, let's go. I couldn't get interested in what I was doing, what I was going to do, and so we went over to church, and they had the windows open, and it was summertime, and the cars back then had big fenders on them, you know, all the older type cars, and we got over there, and boy, Brother Howard was a preaching and a crying. And she said, come on, Daddy, let's go in. I said, well, let's just wait till he quit, and then we'll go in. So I picked her up, and I set her up on a fender of a car. And I hadn't any more set her up there, Brian, till he quit. She said, come on, Daddy, let's go in. So I said, well, yeah, okay, let's go. And I took her off that. If I remember right, I carried her in there. And I always got the back seat, right on the square on the back, because I knowed I had plenty of time to scoot out of there. If the kitchen got too hot, I got out of there. And he started, Brian, Lord is my witness, I hadn't any more than sat down, and he started preaching again. And Brian, I got so scared that I thought I was going outside. I jumped up and I was going to get out of there and getting out of there fast. And I'd even forgot about Linda. Now that's unusual for me to forget about that girl, but I thought I was going to get out of there. And Brian, when I come to myself, I was down at an altar praying. And that was the day that things changed for me. Linda was the main reason, I like to think of it that way, that God used that little girl to get a dad that was on his way on his way out to the whatever. And he used that girl to get Dad to change his footsteps and start walking right. And I got down there and prayed through, and God forgive me. And that was when life began to pick up for me, began to pick up between me and Dad. Now that's something to say, but it began to pick up for me and Dad. And it was just like I didn't want to stay away from Dad too long. Dad didn't want to stay away from me too long. Me and Merle would get out of riding, and this was after our kids got bigger. We would go down and see Dad, and maybe the kids would be here in town, but we'd run down there and see him, even if it just took for an hour and come back.
That's when his
It just changed everything for us whenever that girl convinced Dad to go back to church. And I'll never forget that, Brian. And she was my pal. I won't put it on camera, but I'll tell you some other things one of these times. But she was a little jewel in Dad's life at that time.
Well, the others wasn't older. See, Tommy was 5
of course,
months
that's
old.
right. Tommy was just a little fella.
And Donna Sue was just a...
But there was some comic ones between her and Linda and Sue Foster and all that.
Was you there at the church the night that
Oh
happened?
yeah, I went to church. I went on to church there with Tommy and Donna Sue. See, Tommy was 5 months old, and Donna Sue was just about 3 or a little after.
Do you remember Grandpa coming in with Mom?
Oh, I knew he'd come in. I know he went to the altar, yeah. Because back
Well,
then, see, people just gathered around you and prayed with you till you prayed through, yeah.
Well, what did you think when you looked up and you
I was
seen
happy.
Grandpa heading down to?
I was glad he went to the altar. Because then his life changed, see. Oh, my, yes.
You were already very religious.
Oh, I
at
was
that
in
point.
church, yes. I was in church the time I was 21. And see, I was 23 then, because he got saved when he was 25. Yeah. I held on to church. He wanted me to go to town that night with him. I said, no, you go to church with me. Of course, he took Linda to town with me, and the 2 babies, 2 little ones, went to church with me.
So when you realized you were at the altar and then that everything was over with and you and Grandma were together afterwards, what did you say to Grandma?
Well, he went ahead and got baptized and got filled with the Holy Ghost. And then our life was closed.
Did Grandma say, what in the world got into you? I mean, what
No, I think
I
think we
prayed
were
for him for years.
we were both happy. I'll put it that way. The thing that happened to us, that for me and her, it made our life complete.
Well,
See, we before this, Brian,
like ships
we were
passing
just like
night.
ships passing through the night.
We wasn't closed as a married.
That's
We
right.
He was a good provider. We always had plenty of food, but our life was different. See, he held on to the world, which I didn't. He held on, just a drinking and a smoking and carrying on, and where I had settled down. See, because the Lord brought me in and I was saved, and not only that, but after we got married and I had Linda, I wanted to be more of a homebody, more settled down. I didn't want to go to places that I used to do. I wanted to be a good mother, and that was like a woman should be.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, before Morris got saved, we wasn't a bit close, Brian. On Sunday, when I'd come in from Sunday school, he'd be ready to go to the show and be out all evening. See, go to the show, and I'd stay there and go to church, and be the homebody. Mm-hmm. But after he got saved, see, he was then the homebody. He took the head of the house then, and his heart turned toward his family. He began to buy more things. Of course, we had plenty to eat. We never went hungry, did we? That he provided food, but his heart then turned more to his family and more of a. But he loved his family even before he got in church.
Mm-hmm.
Morse loved his kids. He loved every one of them. But Linda went to town with him that evening because she is the oldest and the biggest one. And like he said, they was close, and she wanted to be with her daddy. But no.
You've told Mom that story before, right? You've talked about that with Mom.
I don't know whether I ever told